If I was to put it politely, some Peugeots of the last 10 or 15 years weren't that brilliant. That's putting it politely. There was the 1007, and that was actually quite a clever idea in theory, where the doors would open backwards and with an electric motor. So if you're in a car park, you wouldn't have big doors to open and hit the car next to you. In practice though, it was a very heavy car. The doors took ages to open. The doors also broke quite often, and just wasn't a very good car. And there was the 206, and that wasn't a bad car to drive, but it wasn't really built with that much pride. So if you see one today, it looks like it's just been attacked with an axe. It's quite poor build quality, so bits of it just fall off and break. And one other car was the Peugeot 3008, and that was an MPV, a style of car that you don't really get anymore because they're not that fashionable. And it just wasn't really a car that you'd want to own. It was a box on wheels for carrying people and things, and that doesn't appeal to me really at all. I want cars to have a bit of personality about them, something interesting. But now there's a new 3008, and it's actually a car you might want to buy. Now, I first got a drive of the new 3008 in Italy back in October, and thought it was really, really good. Now I've finally got it in the UK, so I can actually really get to know it a bit better. First of all, it looks brilliant. On the outside, perhaps the front is a bit normal, it's fairly standard Peugeot, and it's definitely nothing radical. But the back of it is spot on, and there are loads and loads of little details everywhere that they just add to the whole package. It just looks really, really smart, and they're kind of design details that on old Peugeots you just wouldn't get. They just wouldn't have thought about it or dared to be as adventurous as they have been with this car. On the inside as well, that is where it really is just another level. It's completely different to any other Peugeot we've seen before. I'll try and focus on just a few things, because otherwise, yeah, there is actually quite a lot that you could talk about on here, but I'll stick to just a few things. Firstly, the whole cabin feels like it's sculpted around you. You've got quite a high centre console here, and everything is angled towards the driver. Peugeot have also used the materials in a really, really clever way. It's not just, black plastics, black gloss trim and silver bits. There is some of that, of course there is, but they've used other materials really, really well. So you've got almost like a soft touch, not carpet, but like a different material up here. You've got some shiny metal stuff, you've got leather on the seats as well. You've just got different materials, and it feels very well put together. The final thing on the interior that I think is worth pointing out are the displays and the buttons and all the controls, because Peugeot have really, really tried to do something different, and it has paid off massively because it looks so impressive in here. The buttons, rather than just going for the normal push buttons or circular buttons or whatever you might have, they're all kind of conventional on most cars, whereas these are they're quite small little detail pieces that feel very, very sturdy, and as I said, they look very different to any kind of button you get in other cars. And the displays, they're just completely different from anything you've seen in a Peugeot before. This cabin as a whole is Peugeot's second generation of iCockpit. And iCockpit was something they termed for when they first made the steering wheel quite a bit smaller and they got rid of some buttons. Now, however, this is the second generation, and that's why it's such a radical change. And you've got the normal small steering wheel, you've got these buttons, but you've also got standard 12 and a bit inch screen up here that replaces all of the normal conventional dials, and you've got another screen up here for other controls. And both the fact that they're completely standard across the whole range of cars, but the animations and stuff on the dials themselves are brilliant. They genuinely could put cars that cost 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or 10 times more than this to shame, because they're just so good and so clear, and they work really, really well, and they're adjustable, so you can change them depending on what you want to see. Anyway, how does the new 3008 drive? This car has a 1.6 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, and it's got 165 brake horsepower and 177 foot-pounds of torque. 0 to 60 takes 8.9 seconds, and the top speed is 128 miles an hour. And it should manage around 49 miles to the gallon. That's what Peugeot claim. Now, unfortunately, you can only get this engine, which is the highest output petrol engine, with a 6-speed automatic gearbox. There's no manual option for this car. If you want a manual petrol, you have to go for a smaller 1.2 litre 3-cylinder petrol that isn't as powerful and not as fast. So if you want the power, you need to have the automatic. Now the engine is really, really smooth and it's very, very quiet. I'm surprised how quiet it is. And the performance isn't that bad either. 8.9 seconds to 60 is actually pretty quick for a car of this size. But the gearbox and the engine together aren't perhaps the perfect match. The gearbox is smooth most of the time, but sometimes on up changes and down changes, it just gives you a little knock in the back that you're not really expecting. And for me, I just feel like I'd get more out of this car and a better driving experience if I could have a manual gearbox. The steering is quite light, but it does get heavier the faster you go. But the actual speed of it, you can tune in with quite quickly. Although there isn't very much information coming back through the wheel, you can just point and you know roughly where the front wheels are going to go, and that's kind of the impression that I got when I drove it back in Italy. As for the suspension, that's where I really wanted to try this out, because in the UK our roads are just pretty awful. So smooth Italian roads, you don't get a proper feel for it. And actually, even though we're driving it in the UK, it does a very good job at soaking up the bumps. Bigger bumps, it's a little bit soft. You get the feeling it could be a little bit stiffer because it takes a while to settle after a big bump. But normal sort of undulations in the road, kind of potholes and things like that, it just deals with them straight away. Then there are the brakes. Ventilated up front, solid discs at the back, and they're adequate. That's all I'm going to say. They're inside huge 18-inch wheels, and they do a reasonable job at stopping you. But if you do slam hard on the brakes, you've got that soft suspension, so you can kind of feel its weight pitching forward and backwards. So that's something to keep in mind. Now this car is an Allure model, so it's kind of middle of the range, and it's £26,395. And for me, that just seems like really, really good value. It's not just the right price. I actually think you're probably paying a little bit less than you should, because look at the car as a whole. You've got a brilliant design on the outside. Yes, perhaps the front isn't as radical as the back, but it's a good design. And the inside is just so good. It's so smart and so different to other cars. Perhaps the only thing that frustrates me is that on this car, some of the options that I would really like are actually optional extras, like the panoramic roof, which is £900. That's an awful lot of money for a glass roof. And also the fact that you can't get this car with a manual gearbox, you have to have the 6-speed automatic. But for the most part, I'm just so happy that Peugeot have dared to be different. They've done something exciting and they've given this car a personality, and I really, really like that.